There were two of them here, very small, one on this side on the left and two on the right. The first experience was with one of them, the one on this side, who seemed to be holding something, but I couldn't see anything. It was like they had something invisible. I had my eyes open the entire time. Throughout the experience, I never felt fear. That is to say, as the experience unfolded, I didn't feel any kind of terror.
Sparks that I don't remember. Hold on, let it shine. Fix and start to fade away. Fix and start to fade away. Fix and start to fade away.
I am very happy to be here once again with Mario Sabán. Today is the first episode of the second season of Kabala Podcast, which we have been doing since March 2024.
How time flies, doesn't it? We are entering the year 2025, although we kind of live in the future, don't we? Because we're recording this in 2024. So something mysterious always happens, doesn't it? Sometimes, by the time something comes to light, people see the light of something that was being born earlier. It's very much a concept of Kabbalah, isn't it? What is born in the hidden is revealed later.
That's right, Mario. We're going to talk about a topic that, well, given the amount of content we have, it's very likely we'll end up repeating some of the information because it's so extensive and appealing to discuss, at least for me. Today we're going to talk about extraterrestrial entities. We'll approach this topic from a somewhat varied perspective. On one hand, we'll discuss certain references to these entities in sacred texts, but a little later in the conversation, we'll address some empirical aspects, which I think will be very interesting to share. I'm sure this will lead to some fascinating insights, and I look forward to what we'll discover.
Very well. Look, I think there's a branch we could call Kabbalistic ufology, if you will, because we need to approach this topic in a very organized manner. There are so many interconnected subjects that it's easy to get lost. I think the first point worth emphasizing is understanding that if God exists beyond Earth and manifests from beyond Earth, saying that God is extraterrestrial isn't something unusual. Clearly God isn't terrestrial, since all religions and cultures that have invoked the divine have always looked to the heavens. Therefore it's evident that this is outside the context of Earth. So calling God extraterrestrial is something I would start by considering as not surprising at all. Therefore, the idea of the divine coming from beyond Earth should not surprise us. It's actually quite consistent with the broader view of the divine across many cultures. The second point is how much information the Torah has on this topic, and there is a great deal of information. For example, we see the people of Israel being guided by a cloud during the day and by a cloud of fire at night. This clearly indicates that there were entities, if you will, guiding the people of Israel in the desert, and these entities also acted from the sky, so we could also call them extraterrestrial entities. This opens the possibility that these entities were not of this world. In chapter 6 of Bereshit in Genesis, we find the famous story of the giants, the Nephilim, where the daughters of men unite with the sons of God. Who are these sons of God? In other words, if God is extraterrestrial, these sons of God would also need to be conceptualized as extraterrestrial, and it seems they had an interaction with earthly women, so to speak. I would like to refer to the tradition of Kabbalah and start by mentioning something that Isaac Luria says, which I find very, very interesting. We are composed of two substances, or materials, so to speak. This idea opens up a fascinating perspective on our nature and origin. It suggests that our essence could be influenced by both earthly and celestial elements. The first material is our body. Isaac Luria says this in Hebrew, and I'll translate it. Nefesh and Ruach, the lower levels of the soul, which correspond to the bodily soul, and the psychic level, the ruach. These belong to the world of Asaya, which comes from matter, and they originate from the world of Atziluth, the level of the Neshama, the level of Chaya, and of course the level of Yetzirah. In other words, our Neshama, says Isaac Luria, comes from Atziluth, although it is from Beriah, and notice that it is from Beriah, meaning it is seen in Beriah, but its energy comes from Atziluth. We decode what Isaac Luria says. We have an extraterrestrial energy in the Neshama. Our Neshama is extraterrestrial, and it resides in a terrestrial body. If we analyze what Isaac Luria says, we see that we are a mixed being, a mixture of an animal that evolved within the material reality. This evolution would go from Nefesh to Ruach, but there is a point where evolution halts and an energy is inserted from outside the earth, which would be the Neshama. It's interesting that from the Kabbalistic perspective, we can combine two seemingly opposing theories. There is always talk of Darwin's theory of evolution, and something similar can be found in Kabbalah, because moving from Nefesh to Ruach and Luria, saying that Ruach comes from the world of Asiya, that is the material universe, undeniably implies that there is a form of evolution from matter to the psychic. But at the level of the Neshama, there is no evolutionary leap. For Luria, there is an insertion of information that comes from outside. So, if we look at the text of the Torah and the Bible, there is a very interesting topic in Ezekiel, because beyond Ezekiel's vision of the Merkabah, which we could also treat as the vision of an extraterrestrial being, I find it interesting what happens in chapter 2 of Ezekiel, that is, after the vision, because this Merkabah gives Ezekiel something he has to eat so that God can speak through him. What we have here is something very mysterious, because you can make this symbolic if you want, to avoid making it material, but if you analyze it from a material perspective, a type of information was inserted into the prophet Ezekiel so that the Merkabah could speak through him. So, we have two curious cases in the prophet Ezekiel. We have the vision of the Merkabah, which clearly depicts an extraterrestrial anthropomorphic god, and we also have the insertion of this information. So I would say that the Torah is in constant contact with types of energies or intelligences from beyond, starting with the god of the Merkabah, followed by the beings who are the angels that often appear in the text of the Torah. This suggests that the Torah offers a continuous dialogue with extraterrestrial forces or intelligences. This perspective opens up new dimensions for understanding ancient texts and their deeper meanings. We have, for example, in Genesis chapter 18 and chapter 19, some rather strange events. In chapter 18, 3 angels appear to Abraham, and 2 of them go to Sodom and Gomorrah. One stays and speaks with Abraham, and the text of the Torah says in its original version that this figure stood before Abraham. However, during the Great Assembly in the 4th century BCE, the Sanhedrin changed this to say that Abraham stood before God. Here, an important clarification needs to be made. There were so many anthropomorphisms in the biblical text that the Great Assembly, the Sanhedrin of the 4th century BCE, decreed changes to many verses. In other words, there was censorship in the biblical text. Therefore, when someone says, "I want to read the original Hebrew Bible," they should know that approximately 20 to 28 verses were altered by the assembly of the 4th century BCE. This is documented within the Talmud. In my book on the Merkabah, which was my doctoral thesis in theology at the University of Murcia, I detail which verses were changed based on information extracted from the Talmud. This raises many questions. The first is, why did the sages of the Talmud preserve the original texts instead of allowing the censorship to erase them entirely? So many of the sages of the Talmud thought, why should we become accomplices to censorship and deprive future generations of the truthful information we possess? I find it fascinating how the sages of the Talmud understood the reasoning behind the censorship. To avoid idolatry, the anthropomorphic depiction of the god of the Merkabah had to be minimized. These decisions reveal a deep struggle between preserving ancient truths and safeguarding against potential misinterpretations or idolatries. So they concluded, these people are so ignorant that it's better to remove anthropomorphism to prevent idolatry. But in the process of avoiding idolatry, many verses were censored. It wasn't just that they were removed. No, they were changed into entirely different verses. This is what I delve into in my research on the Merkabah. Why do I highlight this? Because when the Kabbalists speak about the god of the Merkabah, where do they place it? They place it in Keter of the world of Beriah. And as you well know, the world of Beriah is space-time. However, Keter of Beriah is simultaneously Malkuth of Atziluth. It's an entry point to a different time and space, or if you prefer a concept we could call eternity. If the Kabbalists positioned the god of the Merkabah in Keter of Beriah, which is Malkuth of Atziluth, it's because they understood that the Merkabah had a form of technology that allowed it to transcend space-time and enter into eternity. His reveals how the Kabbalists understood a profound connection between the Merkabah and dimensions beyond time and space. The Kabbalists were no fools when they placed the god of the Merkabah in Keter of Beriah. The Kabbalists made a clear distinction. The anthropomorphic god of the Merkabah was not equivalent to the Ein Sof, the infinite. They treated them as fundamentally different. What followed was a complex theological dilemma. What do we do with this god of the Merkabah? If we have already declared the infinite God as the supreme deity, we now face an issue that transcends idolatry. It's a challenge to monotheism. Suddenly there seem to be two gods. So what did they do with the god of the Merkabah? They declared it to be the archangel Metatron, effectively disguising or masking the identity of the god of the Merkabah. Notice how, in an attempt to resolve one issue, theology became increasingly complex. The primary goal of the Sanhedrin in the 4th century BCE was to ensure that idolatry was not committed. However, to prevent idolatry, they had to eliminate many of the anthropomorphisms found in the biblical text. To eliminate anthropomorphisms from the biblical text, censorship was required. However, the sages of the Talmud refused to participate in this censorship. Instead, they documented which verses were censored and preserved the original versions as they were written. They wanted to inform future generations that the god of the Merkabah was far more anthropomorphic than the figure we encounter in the current biblical text. What is the Talmudic sage conveying by refusing to participate in the censorship imposed by the Sanhedrin of the 4th century BCE? They are saying that, in the future, idolatry can be avoided by understanding that the god of the Merkabah is anthropomorphic. During the Middle Ages, the Kabbalists revisited this issue and acknowledged, yes, it was highly anthropomorphic, but we cannot declare this figure to be God because, for us, God is the infinite God. So, what do they do with this hot potato? Declaring it as God would lead to a problem of binitarianism. The solution? They declared this figure to be Metatron, effectively camouflaging it. And Talmud say that if Metatron ever claims to be God, the infinite God will strike him with 39 lashes to remind him not to assert divinity. And so they made sure that the god of the Merkabah is not the infinite God.
They put in a manager.
The god of the Merkabah is an intermediary. It does not even call itself God. It refers to itself as Yud-He Vav-He, a cosmogonic name. What we have done is declare two entirely different things as God. We cannot declare the infinite, Ein Sof, as God, because the infinite is beyond any conceptualization. Similarly, we cannot declare the god of the Merkabah as God, because the Merkabah entity never claimed divinity. Instead, it said, I am the one who is being. This means that even the very name of God does not properly apply to either the infinite or the god of the Merkabah. We are using a term that is inherently incorrect.
Mario, don't go. You all don't leave either. We'll be back in 15 seconds. Hey Mario, what are you doing waiting for me? We were supposed to meet at 9 o'clock.
But I've been here since 8:30, Nacho. We have to work.
Well, okay, you're right. We have to get to work. Follow us, join the conversation, and like our content. Discover more about Mario Sabán and Kabbalah at mariosaban.com. Let's continue growing and learning together. I love this podcast. Well, I won't ramble.
Let's get to work.
Well, Mario, the conversation is getting very interesting. I just want to highlight a few points you've made. One figure I don't want to overlook is the Nachash serpent. Before we started talking, we did a bit of reflection on this. Clearly, we are navigating speculative territory regarding this entire situation. As I was preparing for this discussion, I've often thought and continue to find a connection between the description seen here on this side of the image and the extensive work done over many years by psychiatrist and Harvard professor John Mack. He analyzed the accounts of many individuals who claim to have been abducted, approaching the entire topic from a scientific perspective, and I can't help but draw a parallel between those descriptions and the imagery of the serpent. It's fascinating how these ancient symbols continue to resonate in modern experiences, often pointing to shared themes. I'm curious to see where this discussion leads as we dive deeper into the connections between these historical and contemporary phenomena. That is to say, for me, there's a certain similarity in the appearance it has. Let's not forget that the Nachash is the one who, in a way, incites Chava, Eve, to eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, which allows us to access new levels of consciousness. When you were talking about what happened with Ezekiel, there's this recurring sense that certain processes are always intervening in us to drive evolutionary progress. It's as if these encounters, both ancient and modern, are guiding us toward a higher understanding of ourselves and the universe. And then, of course, we have the figure of Enoch, who, one might say, metaphorically speaking, could be considered one of the first abductees. Here, we see an officially recognized image from the Pentagon of a possible extraterrestrial craft in the shape of a pyramid. In this sense, I think this opens the door to a second part of our conversation where we could share experiences. I think it's a perfect segue into exploring these experiences further and uncovering the deeper connections that might emerge. What do you think, Mario?
Yes, no problem. Here, I'd like to highlight a particularly important point. In Aryeh Kaplan's commentary on the Sefer Yetzirah, he references a manuscript housed in the archives of the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. Kaplan mentions that there were hidden Kabbalists who claimed to connect with beings from beyond the realm of Vilon. In Kabbalistic terms, Vilon refers to a dimension beyond the Milky Way. The manuscript, dating back to the 14th century, describes beings measuring between 1 and 1.5 meters tall. Interestingly, these beings are described as being blue in color. Kaplan even notes that certain types of meditations in Kabbalah were specifically designed to establish contact with these entities. So what are we really talking about here? Well, we're talking about the fact that the most secretive Kabbalists were very familiar with this matter. This isn't something emerging only now in the 20th century. We're discussing a document from the 14th century. I've spoken very little about my own experiences. In one of my more recent interviews, I shared a deeply personal experience that I had never disclosed before. Well, no one had asked me about it at the time. I can't recall if it was in 2007 or 2008, but I had an experience that, according to those familiar with these topics, could be described as an abduction. However, I never felt like I was abducted. What I felt was that I was lying on a table. What I do remember is that I was naked, that much I recall, because my entire body was exposed and there were two beings present. They weren't people as we know them. They had faces resembling the image you've shown.
Entities.
Yes, entities with that appearance. There were two of them here, very small, one on this side on the left and two on the right. The first experience was with one of them, the one on this side, who seemed to be holding something, but I couldn't see anything. It was like they had something invisible. I had my eyes open the entire time. Throughout the experience, I never felt fear. That is to say, as the experience unfolded, I didn't feel any kind of terror. It was a moment of mystery, unlike anything I had ever experienced. It was a truly surreal moment, one that left me with more questions than answers, but without any sense of fear or danger. What always intrigued me about this experience is that I never felt any emotions from them. It was very striking because they neither smiled nor appeared sad, and they had no discernible feelings. That struck me as very curious. One of them was on the right side, one of the two on the right, but the one closer to me was like this. I couldn't tell what their sexuality was, whether they were male or female. Their sexuality couldn't be defined. It was as if they existed beyond the human concepts of emotion and identity, leaving me with a sense of both awe and confusion. On the other side, the one on the left did this motion, as if opening my heart. The one on the left did this, and the one on the right placed something there. Then the one on the left did this again, and they all looked at each other and greeted each other, like the Eastern greeting, like the one in Japan, a bow. They greeted each other like this, and that was the end of the experience. 10 years passed after that. A long time went by. I only shared it in an intimate circle. It was an experience that stayed with me, almost like a puzzle that I couldn't fully understand, but it left a lasting impression nonetheless. The second experience was with the same. I'm not sure if they were the same from the first experience, but they were similar in appearance. This time they focused on my head. They did this, placed something there, again invisible. I was looking at them from above and they closed my head. It was another surreal experience, but this time even more intense, as if they were altering something deep within me. These two experiences were significant for me, and I share them because they felt very intense. I never felt fear, and they never displayed any emotions that I could perceive. Afterward, I tried to find any correlation with moments in my life, but I never found a connection. It's clear that I continued my path in studying Kabbalah and delving into deeper levels of esotericism, but I still don't know what the relationship between these experiences and my life journey is, especially since I was already involved in Kabbalah when these events occurred. These experiences remain a profound mystery, but they continue to shape my understanding of the unseen and the unexplained. These experiences remain a profound enigma. I can't connect these experiences to my biography, but undoubtedly there must be some kind of logic behind them that escapes me. However, since I shared these experiences, many people have also written about their own experiences. What once seemed abnormal or something that people didn't talk about is now being shared by many who have had similar experiences. What's curious is that we all seem to agree on these surgical-like operations. That is, surgical operations that are immaterial, because when they made those gestures with their hands, I couldn't see anything being placed. It's fascinating how these experiences, once dismissed or kept private, have become a shared phenomenon for many, opening up new questions and connections. It was like a kind of air. You could not see what they were putting in.
You didn't see it, but probably...
Something was going
Exactly.
on, that's for sure.
In relation to what you're saying, I think it's important, and I extend this invitation to all of our listeners, to share your comments and experiences with us if you've ever had any encounters or lived through something related to the topic we are discussing today. This, in some way, enriches all of us and helps normalize things that have traditionally been approached with certain prejudice or fear. I promise, Mario, that in our next meeting, I will share my personal experiences and some stories from family members whom I trust, who have told me about their own intense experiences. We all have unique experiences that can shed light on these mysterious phenomena, and sharing them can help build a deeper understanding. By sharing these experiences, we not only create a space for greater understanding, but we also begin to break down barriers that have kept these topics in the shadows for so long.
We make the second part, Extraterrestrials Part 2,
Extraterrestrials Part 2.
Kabbalistic ufology. I like it.
Kabbalistic ufology, I'll write it down.
Yes, we are talking about Kabbalistic ufology, and I reiterate once again, the biblical text holds many secrets yet to be revealed, which we will need to continue analyzing in a future opportunity.
Let's get to it, Mario. Shalom.
Shalom.